So who made the decision to get rid?
In the end, the decision was Andrea Radrizzani's, the club chairman. I suspect we'll get into this in far more depth, but to a degree, everything or a lot at Leeds now, certainly at boardroom level, is being decided by committee or being decided, between the two sides who are there. So Radrizzani, who remains as majority shareholder at the moment, but 49ers Enterprises, the investment arm of the San Francisco 49ers, who have a very large minority stake, over 40%, and have this deal to buy the club, and this absolute intention to buy the club, on the proviso at this stage that Leeds do stay in the Premier League. What it means is that everything has to be decided. It can't be unilaterally decided by Radrizzani when it comes to transfers or when it comes to head coaches. The discussion is constantly who is paying for what difference does, say, the signing of Weston McKennie or the signing of Jorginho Rutter, what difference does that make to the future purchase price that that 49ers Enterprises will pay? Is undoubtedly complicated. And I think it's a scenario that cannot persist too much longer. I think everybody would like that to be resolved, particularly 49ers Enterprises. But on the subject of Marsch, I do think it's the right decision. I think they'd reached the point where they'd pushed this as far as they could. It didn't look like it was going to get better. And, the league table was getting considerably worse.
So we'll come back to Marsch in a little while and who might replace him. But the 49ers Enterprises and everything else that is going on above any head coach or manager at Leeds is probably where we should drill down first. Phil Matt says they have a 40% stake, a minority stake. Who are they? How close are they to the 49ers? Because it's not the actual NFL team. It's an investment arm. Yes.
Yeah, correct. I mean, they're an interesting bunch. So who are they? Well, they, as you've both outlined, they are this sort of interesting little side hustle that the York family have got going on. It's kind of like a sort of family office stroke, fund to go invest in sports techie stuff, entertainment, media, you name it, that whole intersection of all the cool stuff that people like to consume. There are close. So the York family are the owners of the San Francisco 49ers, long established, wealthy sports entrepreneur type family. And they put an awful lot of trust in a guy called Parag Maratha, who we've spoken to on our podcast. Very, really bright guy.
2 years ago this very week, he was on this podcast.
See how time flies,
doesn't it?
And I wonder all the amazing things he's done with his time. I mean, he is so busy, that man. He's got like a full-time job running the 49ers at the actual NFL team, and they're pretty good. And he has this sort of interesting job where he looks after investments on behalf of the York family, but with other people who are not connected to San Francisco 49ers. And he's got this increasing role at Leeds United. He's interested in cricket. He's everywhere, right? He's interested in sort of trying to grow the game of cricket in the US. So the Leeds thing started talking about it in 2017. I think they made their first investment in 2018. It was a 10% investment. We've seen these before. A lot of this is about learning. This is that kind of, I wouldn't say the first wave, but it's almost like they were one of the first ones of this most recent wave, which we are still experiencing, of massive US interest in the Premier League, taking a little kind of seat round the table. Here's some money. We think there's something interesting going on in the English Premier League. We think there's some similarities between what you guys are doing and what we can do. We can learn from you. You can learn from us, that kind of thing. And they sat very patiently, very quietly, and learned and sat there quite happily, it seemed, at a 10% holding. They already had a deal in place for a stage takeover, but there are options on both sides. Both sides have, a say over how this deal would progress. But it seemed pretty clear. I can't remember the dates of all the steps, but they went a bit more, then they went a bit more again. I think the move to 44%, which is where they've sat now, was a very, very clear indication that they've seen and learnt enough, and they really like the Premier League.
Yeah.
And the whole time, and there are similarities with the Fenway Sports Group and Liverpool. It's a syndicate. It's a syndicate that has sort of grown and shrunk and grown again with time as people have come in and come out. Some with very small shareholdings. I think what's I think one of the things that I've sort of picked up quite recently, actually, even after writing that story, was that initially it was a bit of a punt. And, the York family said, yeah, go for it. They didn't put much money in themselves. They went quite widely, and some people were putting in quite small amounts for that initial 10% stake, and maybe even when they went to the next jump. When it became clear that no, we really want to take over this club, and we have a timetable to do so, we have this option which we can exercise by January 2024. They were streamlining the group, so they were sort of almost weeding out some of those smaller guys and going for more sort of serious, bigger investors into the group to make it manageable, and to also give people like, we want to see the color of your money. Like, do you really want to do this? Do you want to come on this journey with us? 5-10 million is not probably enough. We need a sort of significant investment because this is going to be expensive.
How is the group perceived amongst the other 56%?
Well, they would tell you publicly, Radrizzani and 49ers Enterprises, that the relationship is healthy and it's very positive. And actually, if you look back at the piece we did, Matt and I, a few weeks ago, it was the only quote of note that we obviously contacted them and asked them to comment on where the takeover was at, how the land lay. It was the only quote of note, only comment they were willing to make was that the relationship between Radrizzani and the 49ers was positive and healthy and constructive and everything else. There's no doubt at all, though, from speaking to people, that the situation is causing complications. And it's not purely the relationship that's causing complications. It's also the state of play with Leeds United, where they are in the table at the moment. When we first wrote about the option that 49ers Enterprises have, we were told that the valuation of the club would be £475 million. I should say that there were people involved who disputed that exact figure, but nobody kind of disputes that the club are valued at around about 500 million, £500 million. Obviously, the 49ers have paid a lot of money already because they're up to 44%. And what the actual final buyout price would be exactly, we'll probably never know. But needless to say, if Leeds were to get relegated, and there is a serious chance of that this season, then they're not going to be worth £500 million in the EFL. So one of the things that has been very much under discussion at the moment has been what happens if they go down. Because as we understood it in that initial agreement for the option for them to buy Leeds, there was no contingency for relegation, simply because nobody was envisaging that was the club they were going to buy, a club who went down into the EFL. And they have grand plans in the background for developing Elland Road, which is massively in need of an upgrade, both in terms of size and in terms of the qualities of the facilities. There's fantastic ground, and it probably is, I think, best ground in the country because of how rough and ready it is. But if you're the 49ers, if you're trying to be a modern Premier League club, it's not the ground you need. It needs to be bigger. It needs to be more modern. But that becomes very difficult, stroke impossible to do in the EFL. And also, as Matt said, in this group of investors who've come together with 49ers Enterprises, and I think we reckon it might be a group of, 15 to 20 tops, something like that, you'll have people whose enthusiasm for buying in is naturally going to be lower if they're thinking that Leeds might not be in the Premier League. I think as this project was put together, the idea was, as in when we buy out Radrizzani, we get a Premier League football club. And at the moment, in mid-February, you can't say that would be the case when this summer comes around.
And I'm just wondering how much structure they have put in place or have been allowed to put in place, given that they are still the minority shareholder.
Well, I think both Phil and I. Well, I'll let Phil jump in. I think you've asked the key question, right? It's the complexity of being a 44% shareholder. You're not in charge.
Yeah, and I don't think the structure at Leeds has the 49ers fingerprints all over it at all. A lot of the people at the top of the club, so Victor Orta, director of football, and Angus Kinnear, chief executive, have been with Radrizzani right from the very start, from 2017, before the 49ers were properly on the scene. But there's a kind of legacy at Leeds as well. And you see this in Elland Road, and you see this in the fact that the training ground they have at Thorpe Arch, which was absolutely state of the art and ahead of its time when it was opened, 20 years ago, is no longer that. They've suffered from a long stretch, 16 years in the EFL, and actually financial issues prior to them getting relegated, which has meant that there's been there hadn't been sufficient development of the club in that time. And whereas other clubs around them have got up to speed and moved with the times and developed very rapidly, Leeds on a lot of fronts have been left behind, and that's the story of Elland Road itself. Great rough and ready ground as it is. Anybody coming over from, say, the NFL, as the 49ers have, would look at it and say, well, this needs to be like the Etihad, this needs to be like Anfield. Actually, this needs to be like about 10 to 15 grounds in the Premier League. It needs to change. So without a doubt, the structure could be broader, but I don't think the structure as it stands at the moment is the 49ers as they would want it. It's very much as it has been since Radrizzani came in.
They've had an American head coach. They've got one American assistant who they brought in very recently, just before Jesse Marsch went. They've brought in American players, and the Tyler Adams signing had a huge effect on Leeds' or the social media interest in Leeds United from America. So there has been a distinct American flavour to a lot of the people they have targeted over the last 18 months.
There has, and I wonder if that's accident design, bit of both. There's a sort of, I was thinking about this the other day, that there's a real opportunity here, or there seems to be a real opportunity here, kind of winding their sails if they stay up, that Leeds sort of become America's team. Now, we've sort of had this sort of conversation before. Fulham, I think, were probably quite a good example when they had this sort of run of American players where the huge burgeoning audience for Premier League football in the States, they're gonna pull for a team with guys they see on the US men's national team. There's no doubt about it. I mean, and that has happened before. And if there is a team that basically has their midfield, you'd be thinking, I want Leeds to win. I'm going to watch Leeds. Now, does that make them Leeds United fans? Yeah, maybe for a time being. But history would suggest when those players move on, many of the fans will move on as well. But look, there's an opportunity. There's definitely an opportunity there, particularly with new viewers, new people who are coming to the game all the time off the back of the Wrexham show, Ted Lasso. We hear it all the time. The NBC's numbers are really, really good. They're only going to get better because of the whole growth of the sport in the States. World Cup's coming in 2026. That's why they're all here. That's why they're investing loads in women's soccer. You name it. The sport is booming. So there's an opportunity, definitely. I'd just be intrigued to see how much. I think the 49ers are pretty savvy sort of guys. I think they'd really like to lean into that. I just don't sense that Radrizzani-led Leeds is.
Who drove a lot of the signings, Phil? Because whilst it's relevant to mention their nationality or some of them, it's also important to mention that there'd be a lot of Premier League clubs who wish they'd signed Tyler Adams, for example.
For sure, yeah. Accident or design was a good phrase that Matt used, because to take Marsch as an example, in no way, despite it looking like it would be an obvious connection, in no way was he the 49ers' choice. He was Victor Orta's choice. They'd been in contact for 2 years before he was appointed. It was Orta who'd sought him out, because they always had this thing with Bielsa, where Bielsa was on a 12-month deal. You never quite knew when you might have to replace him, so you always had contingencies in play, for who you would go for if at short notice it was a case of, right, we need a new head coach. Again, with the players, it's been a kind of mixture of factors. There are certain players who, despite what Marsch said, about them being our signings rather than his signings, i.e. the club signings, Rasmus Christensen from Salzburg, very much a player he knew. Likewise, Max Verber, who came in a few weeks back. And then others who he knows previously, either worked with previously or knows from the US scene. So Tyler Adams being one, Brendan Aronson another. And Weston McKennie, who's just arrived on loan from Juventus. I think there have been others where the club have taken a broader look themselves. So like Jorginho Rutter from Hoffenheim, one of the players that Marsch was very interested in last month up front was Vying at Wolves, who he'd worked with at Leipzig. But Leeds' attitude was that, Vying was well into his career, and at this stage, it's hard to say if he was a particularly good investment, whereas Rutter is 20 years old, very much emerging, had a couple of good years at Hoffenheim, much better in terms of future potential and resale value. A few people have asked me the question this week of what on earth is the point in spending, or committing £70 million worth of transfers to a manager plus an assistant in Chris Armas, and then sacking him. I think the answer to that is that partly it looks odd. On the other hand, Leeds feel that the players they're signing, like Tyler Adams, for example, are just fundamentally good footballers. So they've signed players who, if whether it's Marsch or somebody else, the coach should be able to make something of them.
Yeah, it's not mad if you are running the director of football head coach system,
yes,
correctly. So then that is then actually it isn't mad, because you're building a squad that you want to be in a certain way, and it's about getting the right man to get the tune out of them.
For sure. So the proof is in the pudding now. You appoint another coach, and does it get better? And if it does, what you say is we had the players, we just didn't have the coach. If it doesn't get better, then you start to ask, actually, is the squad good enough? But it certainly looks like it. I was just going to say, in terms of higher up the chain, that when it comes to the transfers, again, you don't have one party making a decision on this. And it is complicated because of the impact that any purchase of player, and obviously Leeds pay in installments like a lot of clubs do. So the cost of those installments further down the line, which, if the 49ers are in charge, they have to bear, but at that point, it is a constant topic of discussion, this. And to use Rutter as an example, there's a suggestion at one point that they might loan him till the end of the season with an obligation and then do him permanently in the summer. But in the end, it was decided, no, we'll sign him now. We'll pay the money now, the upfront fee as we have to, and we'll get it done. And I was told that the 49ers were very active in saying, no, this should be a permanent transfer here and now. So that's how it is, and that's how it's being discussed.